Chapter 9 of The Way to Willpower by Henry Hazlitt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. The Omnipresence of Habit. Thus far I have spoken as if desires and fears and aversions were the sole determinants of action. We come now to something quite as important, if indeed it is not more important than these. While it is often determined by them, it sometimes determines them, and it often guides action with no relation to desires whatever. From the title of this chapter, the astute reader will have already surmised what I am talking about. We may best approach the phenomenon of habit by going outside of the individual and his brain. Habit applies to the inanimate no less than to the animate world. Fold a napkin in a particular way, and it is more easy to fold that way the next time. The creases in a sheet of wrapping paper become indelible. An automobile engine runs more smoothly after it has been worked in, and the friction edges worn down. The very clothes on your back form habits. They fit you better after you have worn them for some time than when they are new. They drape more snugly to the form. The notorious difference in comfort between old and new shoes is possible because the old shoes have been worked into certain feet-conforming habits. A path across a field, be it never so winding, becomes beaten more and more, becomes more distinct and unalterable. That is because it becomes more and more the path of least resistance. And the tendency of all bodies and forces, animate and inanimate, to follow the path of least resistance is the secret of the formation of habit. You assert that the field path is formed by human beings, creatures of habit, the beaten path, and of ruts. I answer by the illustration of a riverbed, which the water follows, though the bed twist and turn and wind. Originally it was formed by sheer accident, as the water, beginning as a spring on a hill or mountain top, bubbled up, made its way around this rock, over that, split here, joined there, washing away the gravel as it went, digging its bed deeper and deeper, more firm and more unchangeable, till at last it flowed in a full, deep, untroubled current. You have doubtless seen the bed of a spring or brook dried up at certain seasons of the year. The definition of a brook is a body of water. Yet you know, though there is no water here, that this is indeed the brook, for this is the path the water will take when it flows again. The dried up brook bed represents what a habit is like in the brain when you are not acting upon it. A more familiar comparison to those who live in the world created by man and not by nature is the groove in a phonographic record, silent in itself, but always ready to produce a tune, and always the same tune when it is put on. That is to say, when the circumstances call it forth. The omnipresence of habit is almost terrifying when one reflects upon it. From the minute a man shuts off his alarm clock on one morning till the minute he shuts it off on the next morning, it controls him. It dictates and makes possible 9/10 of his actions. And 9/10 of the habits of most men are formed unconsciously. It is astounding that men should so leave this thing to chance when it determines the very texture of their lives. Yet the fact must be recorded. A man gets up at 8 because it is his habit to get up at 8, though he has set his alarm and his intentions to arise at 7:30. If it is his habit in a vacant way to contemplate getting up for 15 minutes before he actually does get up, that he will do every morning. When he actually gets up, habit dictates which sock shall go on first, whether shirt or trousers shall go on first, whether collar or shoes shall take precedence, which shoe shall be put on before the other, whether he begins buttoning his vest from the bottom or from the top. At this very private stage of his toilet, we shall leave him a moment for a digression. This digression is needed to point out that habit is not always evil. The same confusion of thought exists in regard to habit and about being a slave to habit that clusters around the word desire. Most of the average man's habits are not only good, but indispensable. Habit may be formally defined as an aptitude or inclination for some action acquired by frequent repetition and showing itself in increased faculty of performance or in decreased power of resistance. Less correctly, but more practically, I should define habit as the doing of a thing without conscious attention and often without thought of the purpose of doing it. Most men cannot tell you how they dress, which shoe they put on first, or whether they button their vests from the top or bottom, until they first mentally rehearse the action, or even until they actually do it. As to the great blessings of habit, Dr. Maudsley says, quote, "If an act became no easier after being done several times, if the careful direction of consciousness were necessary to its accomplishment on each occasion, it is evident that the whole activity of a lifetime might be confined to one or two deeds, that no progress could take place in development. A man might be occupied all day in dressing and undressing himself. The attitude of his body would absorb all his attention and energy. The washing of his hands or the fastening of a button would be as difficult to him on each occasion as to the child on its first trial. And he would, furthermore, be completely exhausted by his exertions. Think of the pains necessary to teach a child to stand, of the many efforts which it must make, and of the ease with which it at last stands unconscious of any effort." End quote. Returning now to our typical man and his morning toilet, we follow him downstairs to his breakfast. Habit dictates what he eats, whether his breakfast is light or heavy, whether he takes a cereal or not, whether his fried eggs are turned or not. Habit has already dictated what time he usually arrives at breakfast. It must, therefore, inevitably dictate whether he shall bolt his breakfast or take it leisurely. Habit dictates whether he props his paper in front of him at breakfast or whether he waits until he boards his train. Habit dictates his table manners. Habit dictates his tone of voice to his wife. If he boards a train, habit dictates whether he shall get on at the rear car or the second car from the front. Arrived at his office, habit dictates the manner in which he approaches his work, the way he handles interviews, his professional mannerisms, his tricks of gesture, his choice of words, his very manner of thinking and looking at things. Habit dictates the time he goes out to lunch and the place to which he goes. Many a man with a special luncheon engagement at an unhabitual place has suddenly checked himself to remember it after finding that his feet had mysteriously carried him right up to the very door of his customary restaurant. Finally, when he has returned home and taken his dinner, habit dictates how he shall spend the evening. If he is in the habit of going out every night, he will feel restless and uncomfortable staying in. He will go out not for enjoyment, but because he knows not what else to do. He knows merely that the thought of staying home is intolerable. His so-called pleasures, far from spontaneous, fall into certain conventionalized and accepted activities, which may be called social habits, habits possessed by the community at large. They will differ between one country and another, between one town in the same country and another. Our man will find himself for a period going frequently out to play poker. Then, for another period, he will find his most frequent diversion will be going to dances. For a while, it will be going to the theater or the movies. For another period, it may be bowling. Then it will be staying at home to read. Such habits change with seasons, by sheer accident, and in different periods of life. The evenings of some men are as much a burden to them as their business day. Their evening's outing is as much a duty as earning their bread and cheese. As they dress to go out, they sigh. They are about to embark on one of the accredited methods of having a good time. It often does not occur to them to ask whether they are actually having it. They vaguely regard going out as a sort of necessity, like fate. They are indeed slaves of habit. But our man's day is not ended. He returns home. Habit dictates the hour at which he retires, even though he has made 1,000 resolutions, night after night, that he shall hereafter retire an hour earlier. In fact, the nightly resolution itself may be a habit. The resolution is usually made in the morning, for an outside influence, his employer or the relentless call of business, has pretty definitely fixed the hour at which he must arise. His manner of undressing is as definitely fixed as his manner of dressing. He puts out the light, opens the window, and goes to bed. Habit dictates the position he assumes in bed, and perhaps how deeply he sleeps or fails to sleep. We have pursued our typical man enough, and we leave him. There are worse than he. Absent-minded persons not accustomed to changing their dress to go out of an evening, and intending only to take off a few articles, have found themselves getting completely undressed and proceeding to go to bed. You who laugh irreverently at this, who boast that you are free from unthinking habit and that you act only with thought, kindly make this experiment. Perhaps you carry your watch in your lower right-hand vest pocket, the chain across your vest, your keys or knife or ornament in the other pocket, on the end of the chain. Reverse it. Put your watch in your lower left-hand pocket. Now, without making any special effort either to forget or to remember that you have shifted your watch, wait until an unplanned occasion to use it arises and see how many times you reach in your right-hand pocket for it and pull out the other end of the chain before finally a new habit is formed. Or put your watch in your upper pocket and see how many times you reach for your lower pocket and think frantically for a moment that your watch is gone. Or shift your silver change from your trousers to your coat pocket, or from your right to your left, and see how many times your wrong hand dives into the wrong place. Habit makes possible the acquisition of all skilled movement. The practice that makes perfect, the practice at swimming, tennis, skating, dancing, bowling, juggling, automobile driving, and stunting with an airplane, is nothing more and nothing less than the formation of habit. I have learned to operate a typewriter by touch. As I write these words, I do not have to pick out the letters on the keyboard. I do not look at the keyboard. I do not even think of the letters. I think only of what I am going to say. I watch the words on the paper as they marvelously form, and my fingers, without attention from me, are mysteriously finding their way with lightning rapidity to the proper keys. Habit. And if I should start to think consciously of my fingers or the keys, I should begin to make mistakes, and my speed would slow up. If you are still not sufficiently impressed with the importance of habit, let me quote to you the words not of a moralist given to sermonizing, but the dry, scientific statement of fact by a psychologist, W.B. Pillsbury. Quote, "The useful man is for the greater part marked off from the useless and the vicious by the nature of his habits. Industry or indolence, good temper or bad temper, even virtue or vice are in the last analysis largely matters of habit. One forms the habit of working at certain times of the day, and soon if one is not busy at that time, one experiences a lively sense of discomfort. Or on the contrary, one forms the habit of loafing all day. Work then becomes distasteful, and indolent irresponsibility is established. Losing one's temper is largely a habit, as is self-control. Each time one is provoked by a trifle, it becomes the more difficult to look calmly at an unpleasant episode. While each time one remains calm under difficult circumstances, strength is gained for later difficulties. Similarly, whenever temptation is resisted, virtue gains a victory. When temptation is yielded to, new weaknesses develop. Frequent yielding makes resistance practically impossible. A bank president of established morals could no more step out and pick a pocket that was temptingly unprotected than he could fly. The habitual drunkard can no more resist the invitation to have a glass than he can resist the action of gravitation while falling freely through space. Frequent giving in has entirely destroyed his original freedom of choice." End quote. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Alteration of Habit. Habit being of such enormous importance, it is our urgent duty to seek the means of forming good habits and of breaking bad ones. How does habit become possible? For the answer to that, one must turn to that strange and awe-compelling mass of gray and white matter boxed within the bones of the skull. The brain is composed of an immense number of separate and minute cells called neurons. Each is connected potentially with a number of other neurons. The points of connection are called synapses, We may visualize the brain as a network of delicate piping or exquisitely slender tubes, each tube containing a number of valves leading to other tubes. The tubes are the neurons, the valves the synapses. When a stimulus comes from the outside world, it sends a mysterious current, which we may envision as the current of some fluid like water, through one of the tubes. This forces itself out of one of the valves into the particular tube leading from that valve. This tube in turn has a number of valves, and the current forces its way out of the one most easily opened, and so on, until the current emerges finally in the form of an action. In this picture, I have represented as tubes nerves, as well as neurons. The tubes which send incoming messages to the brain are called sensory nerves. Those which carry out the orders of the brain are called motor nerves. If the outward stimulus is an itch, the message is carried by an adjacent sensory nerve to the brain, passes through the tubes and valves there, the neurons and synapses, and emerges through a motor nerve in the form of the action of scratching. Or the itch is discovered by some nerve in the eye to be due to a scab, which it would be harmful to scratch. This nerve sets up a countercurrent. Other valves are opened and others kept closed, and the action of scratching does not follow. Certain valves or synapses are from birth predisposed to open with particular ease. The special paths which these make possible are called instincts. The infant feeds on its mother's breasts at birth. It has had no experience, no knowledge. It may not be able to see. Yet a particular sensation awakens a particular response. The instincts we have in common. In addition to these inherited paths, which all have, there are paths open in the brain at birth, which vary in different individuals. These we call innate characteristics. Now, while these paths of instinct and innate characteristics are often highly useful, they are sometimes exceedingly dangerous. They need to be supplemented by experience and knowledge, which dictate the opening of new or altered paths. When a path is once taken, it wears down the valves, the synapses, through which it passes. Those valves open so much the easier thereafter, and the taking of that path becomes so much easier the next time. On the next passage of the current, those particular synapses open more easily still, until the time may come when they will form the only possible path, when it will be impossible for the well-worn valve to offer more resistance to the onrushing current than the valve seldom or never opened. Such is the physiologist's explanation of habit, and it is at once a despair and a glorious promise. Forming a new habit is like forging for yourself a new path in the woods through stubborn underbrush and prickly thorns, while all the while it is possible for you to take the well-worn, hard-trodden, pleasant path that already exists. But you can reflect that every time you travel through the new path, you are going to tramp down more shrubbery and clear more entanglements from the way. Every time you take the path, it is going to become easier. And that is the cheerful side. When you first set about to abolish a bad habit and establish a good one, it is going to take all the effort, all the willpower at your command. But habit begins soon to take the place of willpower. It will require less and less effort, less and less willpower each time. The strain diminishes until in time it disappears. For the practice of that particular virtue, willpower has become almost useless. Willpower is not needed all the time. It is called for only at the period of change. But the period of change is all important. It is better not to be too ambitious and not to try to change too many habits at once. Yet as soon as you find one new method of response becoming automatic, you may turn to another. You will always find another. No matter how long you live, nor how diligent you are, you will never exhaust the supply of new good habits that it is possible to form, nor the supply of old bad habits it is possible to break. And all the time you will be keeping alive the faculty of effort within you. Putting forth moral effort, or failing to, is itself a habit. All this comes into the head of what William James would call making our nervous system our ally instead of our enemy, which consists in making automatic and habitual as early as possible as many useful actions as we can. James, building on the suggestions of Bain, has laid down several maxims of habit which it would be difficult to improve upon. Quote, "The first is that in the acquisition of a new habit or the leaving off of an old one, we must take care to launch ourselves with as strong and decided an initiative as possible. Accumulate all the possible circumstances which shall reinforce the right motives. Put yourself assiduously in conditions that encourage the new way. Make engagements incompatible with the old. Take a public pledge, if the case allows. In short, envelop your resolution with every aid you know. This will give your new beginning such a momentum that the temptation to break down will not occur as it otherwise might. And every day during which a breakdown is postponed adds to the chances of its not occurring at all." End quote. In this connection, let me say a word about the effect of a change of environment upon a change of habit. In our ordinary life, a certain routine is laid down from us from without, and this largely controls the routine developed from within. Our hours of business and the hours at which we take our meals, the time it takes to get from the office to the home, and the method that must be taken, the very arrangement of furniture in our room, all help to engender and develop and petrify certain habits. But if a break should occur in this routine, if the hours or the nature of our business should be changed, if we should move from the city to the country, a vast number of our habits would be changed perforce. Such changes in environment should be welcomed when they occur. They should be recognized and seized upon as rare opportunities for the conscious formation of new useful habits and the breaking of old bad ones. The old habits were made possible because they were unconsciously suggested by associations in the old environment. But when we change, we can no longer do some of the old things absent-mindedly because the old responses are not suggested, and often they do not fit. Reform on our habits of rising and retiring, in the hasty or leisurely eating of our meals, and many another daily custom that determines our life happiness, thus becomes more possible. But the trouble is that most of us, when such opportunities come, fail to appreciate them, and fall again unconsciously, without deliberate choice, into habits as bad as the habits we left. Returning to the James Bain maxims, the second is, quote, "Never suffer an exception to occur till the new habit is securely rooted in your life. Each lapse is like the letting fall of a ball of string which one is carefully winding up. A single slip undoes more than a great many turns will wind again. Continuity of training is the great means of making the nervous system act infallibly right." End quote. A German writer has remarked, quote, "He who every day makes a fresh resolve is like one who, arriving at the edge of the ditch he is to leap, forever stops and returns for a fresh run." End quote. This leads to James's third maxim, which is, quote, "Seize the very first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make, and on every emotional prompting you may experience in the direction of the habits you aspire to gain. It is not in the moment of their forming, but in the moment of their producing motor effects that resolves and aspirations communicate the new set to the brain. No matter how full a reservoir of maxims one may possess, and no matter how good one's sentiments may be, if one has not taken advantage of every concrete opportunity to act, one's character may remain entirely unaffected for the better." End quote. And to impress his remarks, James gives a final example. Quote, "The drunken Rip Van Winkle in Jefferson's play excuses himself for every fresh dereliction by saying, 'I won't count this time.' Well, he may not count it, and a kind heaven may not count it, but it is being counted nonetheless. Down among his nerve cells and fibers, the molecules are counting it, registering and storing it up to be used against him when the next temptation comes. Nothing we ever do is, in strict scientific literalness, wiped out." End quote. Oh, the pathos of telling yourself when each new temptation arises, "I will begin to reform the next time. I will yield this time, and this time will be the last." Oh, the tragedy of that excuse. Self-deception could not possibly be more complete. If you can only tell yourself when temptation arises, not that this time will be the last, but that the last time was the last. If you can only repeat that to yourself, if you can only force your attention to rivet on that fact, if you can only realize that the whole force of your will and moral effort must be summoned now, and not at some vague time in the future, if you can burn into your mind that this battle, this inward struggle against temptation, is the only real and crucial one, if you can forget about the moral struggles won or lost in the past, or that you expect to win in the future, and concentrate only upon the present battle, then truly you will be on the way to willpower. And it is the only way. Moral sentiments, fine ideals, excellent mottos, splendid resolutions are all mere preparation for the struggle. They are all very well in their place, but if they do not express themselves in action and express themselves at the moment when temptation has come, they are worse than useless. There was once a man whose wife, for curious reasons, was beaten by another man. This beating occurred regularly. The other man would break into the house, flog the wife unmercifully in front of the husband until she fell unconscious, and then leave. The other man was bigger than the husband, so the husband could not fight back. But the husband bought himself a revolver. It was a beautiful revolver with an exquisite pearl handle, and its nickel finish glistened in the sun. The husband loaded it. The other man came again, beat the man's wife until she screamed for mercy, and left her prostrate. But where was the husband, you ask? He was right on the scene. Didn't he use his revolver? You persist. Well, the fact must be admitted that a very strange thing happened. When the other man came, the husband was so frightened that he dropped his revolver and ran. This happened again and again. It may be said to the husband's credit, however, that every time the beating was over and the other man had left, the husband always came back, picked up his revolver, petted it lovingly, polished it again, pointed it with great magnificent determination at an imaginary object and said, "Ah, wait till he comes next time." This is a parable. It is hardly necessary to point out that the other man symbolizes the man's temptations and cravings and baser instincts, that the wife symbolizes his better self, that the revolver symbolizes his ideals, and the cartridges his sentiments and mottos and resolutions. In the moment when they were needed, these cartridges did not go off, they did not explode, they were not effective, and the simple reason was that the man did not summon the effort to pull the trigger. You need ask yourself only one question about this parable, but your answer must be honest. Does the husband symbolize me? End of chapter 10.